Okay.
Come back to this.
Okay, yeah. We're going to talk about,
so much.
no problem. We'll talk about produce from Eretz Yisroel, particularly what that means for us living here in Chutz La'aretz. And I'm going to talk about three topics. I'm going to divide what I have to say into three topics. One is Shemittah, which has just passed, but it's still relevant to us. The next is going to be Arlah, and then Terumos Maishos. Okay, we're going to talk about these three different topics and how they relate to us. Feel free to ask questions or stick in something in the middle if you'd like. Okay, our first topic is going to be Shemittah, and that is like this. First, a drop of concepts. As relates to Shemittah, fruits and vegetables are not treated in the same way. Broadly, we break up things between fruits and vegetables, and that is as follows. When we want to know when a fruit, whether it is or is not from Shemittah, that depends on the year that it had its growth during, which is to say that oranges that we're seeing now coming from Eretz Yisroel, those oranges are Shemittah oranges because they grew during Shemittah. Even though they were harvested well after Shemittah, we're now, 6 months after Shemittah, even though they were harvested well after Shemittah, their year depends on when they were grown, as opposed to vegetables which very much depend on when they were harvested. Okay, so the vegetables for Shemittah basically only make a difference during Shemittah. So, for example, there's an Israeli company that sells carrots. They've been exporting carrots to Chutz La'aretz the whole Shemittah. They've been sending their carrots. Those carrots during Shemittah pose a concern of Shemittah, while as opposed to those that are coming now to America are not Shemitah issue. They have the other issues we're going to talk about later, Terumos and Meiser, but they don't have a Shemitah concern. Okay, now, as we start talking about Shemitah, I'm not going to talk about one very big question about Shemitah, which is Heter Mechira. Those who follow and accept the Heter Mechira, I don't know what you say, go to sleep for the next few minutes, but they don't think about whether things do or don't have the rules of Shemitah to them. The CRC has, at least for the Hashkacha side of it, Hashkacha side of it, treats it that we do not accept the Heter Mechira. That's when our Hashkachas work with that concept. Someone calls us on the phone, one of our stores has a question, one of our factories wants to use produce, we work with the assumption that we don't accept the Heter Mechira. Okay, so there's a difference between fruits and vegetables. Yes, good.
Even those who are relying on Heter Mechira, is there really any guarantee that produce coming from Eretz Yisroel went through the Heter Mechira?
Okay, so when we looked into that, and it turns out that, I forget the exact number of how many people don't follow the Heter Mechira because they keep Shemitah in the traditional manner, but besides for those people who do that, it was about 95% of the farmers are participating in Heter Mechira. There's only a few holdouts, who B'shita will not participate in Heter Mechira. Just about everybody else does. So if you see an orange that came from Eretz Yisroel, that from a farm that didn't keep Shemitah, they didn't follow Shemitah in the traditional manner, they were part of the Heter Mechira. Okay, it's very, very few who did not. Okay,
remember the fellow, the Rav that spoke here?
Rav Ramon?
Didn't he say that there's a lot, don't assume, is he using that same person? I remember him saying, don't assume it's Heter Mechira because here's the reasons why.
So I don't remember what he said, but I do know that I spoke to the rabbinate and to the farmers, and the numbers came out that it was literally almost everybody. Okay, they have a list. The rabbinate put up a list of all the farmers who participated versus statistics of how many farmers there actually are in Eretz Yisroel, and it was almost everybody. It was really, really close to everybody. To the point that it was so minuscule that essentially we ignored those people. I don't know what Rabbi Ramon said. I'm just saying we looked at the information. And, okay. So one thing is the difference between fruit and vegetables has to do with the years they grew. The second is that fruits that grow during Shemitah have Kedusha Shviyas. Kedusha Shviyas, they have a special Kedusha, something special about them. Among those rules are, you can't waste it. You can't throw it out. You can't take it to Chutz La'aretz. You can't buy and sell it for money. There are all kinds of rules about things that have Kedusha Shviyas. So for, again, our oranges or grapefruits or the clementines that are coming to Chutz La'aretz, if they have that they're coming from Shemitah produce, well, first of all, they weren't supposed to be exported. They weren't supposed to be exported. But now that they are here, they have Kedusha Shviyas. That means is you can't waste them. You can't throw them out. If you don't want to eat the rest of your orange, you can't throw it out. You need to leave it until it rots to the point that you can't eat it. There is a question as to what about peels and pits, the non-edible parts of that. So in the postscript it speaks about that peels and pits are sorts for animals. So just last week, it so happens that just last week we were asked to visit a spice store in Evanston that's looking for hashgacha, and we walked into there, and among the many different spices that they have their own dehydrator right there in the back of the store, where they take orange peels and lemon peels and dehydrate themselves to grind up into whatever spice is they use. So it's even actually in human food, not just animal food. Okay, so all these things have Kedusha Shvius. What Kedusha Shvius means is, if you eat the orange, when you're finished, the parts you didn't want need to be left on the side until they dry out and rot, until they're not edible anymore, and then you throw them out. Okay, that applies to fruits. And the reason why it does not apply to vegetables is because there's a different rule, which is the Chachamim said that if vegetables grow during the year of Shemitah, when I say they grow means nobody planted them, they just grew on their own. The Chachamim said they're all usher. They're usher to something called tzvichin. The Chachamim said they're all usher. It comes from the word in the pasuk, "Ei tzvich ketzircha lo sitzar." The Torah says you can eat tzvichin, the things that grow by themselves. The Chachamim said you can't eat anything that grows by itself. Anything that needs to be planted each year, you can't eat it even if it grows by itself. And the reason for that is because the Chachamim were concerned that people would plant things and say, it just grew by itself, and pretend that it grew by itself. So Chachamim answered all vegetables, essentially all vegetables, things that need to be planted each year, are asur as tzvichin. So those carrots that I mentioned to you, during Shemitah, they didn't have Kedusha Shvius. I mean, they theoretically had Kedusha Shvius, but they were asur because they were tzvichin. If you didn't have the het mechira, those carrots were asur. You were not allowed to eat them. So in a fruit, even if the farmer didn't keep Shemitah, the farmer worked his field and did all the wrong things, it says Kedusha Shvius. And you're allowed to eat it, but vegetables are not like that. A vegetable that grew during Shemitah is asur. You're not allowed to eat it. So that's a big difference between a fruit and a vegetable. Now again, we don't have vegetables from Shemitah anymore. It's now so long after Shemitah. What? Okay, maybe herbs. Yes, we maybe see some herbs, dried herbs from Eretz Yisroel. But by and large, we're sort of finished with vegetables. But as far as fruits are still continuing, and the fruits that we have Kedusha Shvius. While I'm at this point, I'll wait to the next thing. No, I didn't say industrially. I'm talking about for what we see in the stores, consuming. Okay. Now, the one last rule, which is about fruits, which is that there's a mitzvah called beer. The mitzvah called beer, and that is, the produce of Shemitah is supposed to be hefker, and anybody can take it. The Torah says, when there's no more produce available out in the fields, there's nothing available for people just to walk around and take, then you're not allowed to hold on to any of that produce in your house. So if I walked out and took in 20 apples, when there were lots out there, I was allowed to take as much as I want to. Come the time that there are no more apples left out in the fields, I can only keep enough apples to eat for me and my family 3 meals worth. Okay, so basically I have to get all the rest of it and make it hefker. So that mix of beer happens when there's no more of that fruit available, of each particular fruit that's available. At that point I need to make it hefker and give it out to whoever wants to take it. If I didn't do the mitzvah of beer, the fruit becomes asur. If I didn't do the mitzvah of beer when it was supposed to be, then that fruit is no longer allowed to be eaten. So now, that's a general rule for fruit. Now there's one particular case that happens each Shemitah, and that is, without getting into all the gory details, is something called Oitzer Bezdin, which is a way of harvesting produce and selling it, etc. You've all heard of it probably for your esrogim. There's a question then. There's a question whether produce made with Oitzer Bezdin has Kedusha Shvius after the time of beer passes. Okay, I just said a lot of things at once. If it's Oitzer Bezdin, and the time of beer passes, and the Bezdin did what they were supposed to, does it still have Kedusha Shvius? Okay. Let me just finish my thought. Most Rabbanim take the position that it does continue to have Kedusha Shvius. You can't send it out of Eretz Yisroel, you can't waste it, etc. There's one particular hashgacha that does not, and they say that once the time of beer passes, it no longer has any Kedusha Shvius. And they therefore certify wines that are made with this fruit. They sell them in Chutz La'aretz. They are of the opinion you could sell it in Chutz La'aretz, and they sell it in the open market, meaning to people who know nothing about Kedusha Shvius and can't do anything about it. That's what they do. We don't recommend those wines. If a person has them, they should eat with Kedusha Shvius, but we don't allow them.
What those wines are?
It's under a certain hashgacha.
Which hashgacha?
I'll take it afterwards. Yeah, I'll take that. He's not ashamed of it. His name is Rabbi Orbach. That's his name. And it'll say, if you read the little letters on the Bible, it'll say, Oitzer Bezin, something like the beer was done properly, or after the time of beer, or something like that. What?
It's very
Yes, and those they're kosher. I mean, that's inherently they're kosher and they can be eaten with kedusha shvius, but we will not allow Hungarian to sell them because of this concern. Okay, because of this position that they should have kedusha shvius, in which case you can't just sell them to anybody unless that person knows what they're supposed to do with it and how to treat it properly, etc.
Also Bezdin, is that necessary? If it's also Bezdin, this means it was not used in the Mechira?
Right. That means as those people kept Shemitah in the traditional manner, they took care of their fields and harvested all under the direction of a Bezdin, who made sure they did it properly. If that stuff was done...
So you cannot, if you rely on the head of Mechira, you cannot rely on that for Otzer Bezdin because those farmers did not use the...
They didn't sign into the Heter Mechira. Correct. Correct.
Therefore you can't use it?
No, he's saying don't treat it as non-Shemitah. He's saying don't treat it as non-Shemitah. It is Shemitah produce. It has Kedusha Shvius.
Right.
Okay, let's go on. Okay. So now I'm going to give you some information. It's not like you're supposed to memorize it, but just to give you an idea of what's going on with produce at this point. Okay. There's two pieces of information we need at this time of the year, which is to what point does this item have Kedusha? I mean, to when do we think it's still in the market? And what's the date of beer? Okay, I didn't make up the dates that you're about to see over here. They come from people at Eretz Yisroel who research this together with farmers, etc., to understand when things are. And some things actually come from Chazal. They give us the dates in Chazal. You'll see that in a second. Okay, and actually, the first one is out on carrots. The din is that vegetables, of course, they don't have beer. Beer for us is only for fruits. But kedusha shvius is kedusha shvius, or a concern of slichin for vegetables. The din is it only applies till Hanukkah. Okay, you don't need to be concerned that they'll be there till Pesach Hanukkah. That's a date given in Chazal. In this case, that's accurate for us also.
How do you know that it wasn't planted before Hanukkah?
No, the question is, by vegetables depend on when they were harvested. So, in order to be a shvius carrot, it would have to have been harvested by Rosh Hashanah. So that means Hanukkah, which is 6 weeks later. By that point, we wouldn't be concerned that it's still around. Okay, so clementines, if you look over here, the day of beer was the middle of Sivan. Okay, that means come 2-3 weeks from now, someone buys clementines, which are actually right now in the market in America. Those will not be mutter. You won't be allowed to eat them come 2 weeks from now. If you buy them today, you can eat them with kedusha shvius. If you buy in a couple of weeks from now, you will not be able to eat them. Those will have been past the time of beer, and we would tell people not to eat them. Okay, so it's getting close to the time when you will not be allowed to eat them.
Can I interrupt for a minute?
Sure.
Where is this published? Like for our Balabata, maybe you're not aware of this. The dates of beer themselves.
Okay, so
going to Hungarian, well, not Hungarian, but let's say Jewel or.
So we actually got charged from people in Eretz Yisroel. We got charged from people in Eretz Yisroel. We didn't think of it early enough to find a way to make that available to the public. Theoretically, we could. What we tell the public is, if you buy produce from Eretz Yisroel, call us and we'll look it up for you in the chart. But we haven't done it in a way that's public. We didn't make this up. This is coming from, we put the pictures on. Okay. Now, the grapes actually is a good example of grapes, because the din is that grapes, the time of beer is Erev Pesach of the year after Shemittah. In fact, farmers think that actually it's earlier than that. They think that there'll be nothing left on the fields earlier than that, but it's brought in the din that it's still Erev Pesach, so we follow that date. And it opens up the question of, how does anybody figure this out? How does anybody predict when are there going to be no more clementines left on the trees? It's not such a clear science, if you could call it that. Okay, let's go through a few more. Okay, oranges are year they passed already. Okay, the middle of the year they've already passed the time of beer for oranges. Something called passion fruit, and I left that blank there when the kedushas because I'm going to get back to that in a minute.
Since it's on the 17th of the month.
It probably has to do with the days of the week. It probably has to do with that. I think it's about the middle of the month, and that's like a Sunday or whatever. I have no idea. I don't know how. I don't make this stuff up, but this is okay, the sabras.
Another 17, another 15.
There must be something with the 70. I have no idea. Okay, and watermelons again is a vegetable, so there's no questions of beer. And since it's a vegetable, its time depends on the sweetness is until Hanukkah.
Until Hanukkah.
Anything that you plant every year essentially fits into the vegetable category. Okay, so tomatoes would be in this case a vegetable.
Can you just answer one? Can you go back?
Yes.
To the, sorry. Back to the other chart.
I can't go back.
You can't go back. So you had Yud Zayin Av, let's say, listed for clementines and oranges for the kedusha, but the beer happened earlier. So why is that the date of the kedusha shvi is still relevant if we're up to the biur that's coming up now?
So that means the word kedusha maybe is not the right word. That means is if I see an orange out in 2 months from now, that might still be a Shemitah orange. Since the time of beer passed, I say, I can't eat this fruit. But if I walk out to the store in 6 months from now,
Start buying after the date.
yes, in 6 months from now, I'll say, right, in 6 months from now, I say, that must have been from a different year or whatever. Okay. Okay, any more questions on Shemitah before we move on to Arlah? Okay?
Any industrial concerns?
I'll last longer. It lasts because there's certain products, like he mentioned herbs beforehand, and then there's the other thing, which is, what do these people do with all the carrots?
Are there things that we say don't eat hashgacha? Like things that people buy, like frozen vegetables and other things that you have to be concerned about after the long run?
So anytime we say something doesn't eat hashgacha, like a vegetable, it's sort of a built-in understanding that if it comes from Eretz Yisroel, you have to be more careful. There aren't so many things that are always from Eretz Yisrael, and the ones that are, I don't know if the example's on here, is watermelon seeds. For some reason, Israel's cornered the market on watermelon seeds. So watermelon seeds really often come from Eretz Yisrael. So though he won't recommend to people, won't say that there's a concern they come from Eretz Yisrael, you have to do the right things before you can eat them. That's what we're talking about today. Who eats watermelon seeds? We get hashgacha on a company that makes watermelon seeds. They buy tens of thousands of pounds at a time. And they actually stocked up before Shemitah, so they'd be able to carry over and wouldn't have a concern.
Dried salt,
They roast them. They roast them. Okay.
On the Svichen thing, it's Tuchaneke. Nowadays stuff is stored for months and months.
Right. So on a retail level, we worry about the Hanukkah. On a commercial level, like this carrot company, if you think about what's going on with the carrot company, many of the regular customers won't buy from them because it's Shemitah produce, it's Tzvichen. Okay, well, they still have the carrots. So they're going to hold on to them and as long as they can.
I said, but retail too, it's a much longer food chain. It's have to refrigerate every carrots will make it to market within 2.5 months.
So I don't remember the details on the carrot.
We're just relying on the
No, I'm going to look back at it. I don't remember. I know when we looked into the peppers, Chazal were right on target in how long they last and how long they come to market. So I don't.
Carrots should last for a long time. It's a root
I don't know. Okay. On to Arlah. Okay. What is? Oh, that I shouldn't be. Okay. What's Arlah? Okay. Arlah is that for the first 3 years. That that a tree grows, the fruit of that tree are not allowed to be eaten. Not only can you eat it, it's even asher b'hana. So that halacha of Arlah applies everywhere in the world. If you have in your backyard an apricot tree, I don't know if you have that here, you have an apple tree in your backyard, you plant that tree, for the first 3 years that the tree is planted, you can't eat it. It's a very complicated thing to figure out how you measure those 3 years. It's not dated. It's not 3 years from the day you planted it. There's all kinds of ways to calculate that. But what we call it is, if it's been around for the first 3 years, the fruit of that tree is not allowed to be eaten. It applies to fruits and nuts, anything that grows on a tree that lasts through the winter, that lasts above the ground through the winter. Okay, that's the rule. That applies in Eretz Yisroel and in Chutz La'aretz. However, the reason why we don't think much about Arlah living in Chutz La'aretz is because of a special rule, Halacha L'Moshe Sinai, which is Safek Arlah. If you're not sure if something is Arlah or not, in Eretz Yisroel it's Asur. In Chutz La'aretz, that is Mutter. So that means if I walk into the fruit store and I see that they're selling oranges, I don't have to worry that those oranges might or might not be Arlah, because it's a suffix. I don't know if it is or is not Arlah. I don't worry about that. If I have nuts growing in my backyard and I know that it's in the first 3 years, I'm not allowed to eat them. But if I don't know if I'm a suffix, I'm allowed to eat them. Okay, so for us in Chutz La'aretz, we don't think very much about Arlah because everything is suffix Arlah is mutter. Every time we walk into the store, we say suffix, it's mutter. It's automatic, so automatically mutter. But, if we get produce from Eretz Yisroel, then we have to then be concerned that might be Arlah, that produce might be Arlah. Okay? For those of you who are paying attention, looking at the map over there, just for your curiosity, not so relevant to today, you notice that the map of Eretz Yisroel is in 3 different colors. The green area is the part that is, all opinions agree that that's considered Eretz Yisroel, halachically considered Eretz Yisroel. The green, all the green is considered, halachically considered to be Eretz Yisroel. The orange is, I'm sorry, the purple on the very bottom, I don't know if that's right called, the purple on the very bottom is not Eretz Yisroel. It's in the political borders of Israel, but it's not Eretz Yisrael, like Eilat. They keep 2 days Yontif there. And in the middle, the orange there that's in the middle, is areas that there are questions about. Okay? You're just curious why there's such a pretty colorful anatomy.
What's the yellow?
Yellow.
What? The what?
The Arlah in yellow.
The yellow, it's also a shiloh. It's also part of the shiloh. Orange and the yellow are.
Why are the two green?
Why the two colors? Probably that has no significance to this. To my knowledge, that has no significance to this. Okay.
And does this map apply to your first part of your presentation about Shemittah as well?
100%. Same thing. That map is, same thing. Okay, so Safek Arlah in Eretz Yisroel is Asher, in Chutz Aretz is Mutter. Okay, now, this question, well, what does it mean that Safek Arlah is Asher? Okay, what does that mean? If there's any question on Arlah, that makes it Asher. What does that mean? So let's talk about that. There's a number of different opinions about this question. There's a general rule that if we don't know whether something is Mutter or Asher, some of them are Mutter, some of them are Asher, we say, call the parish, Meruba parish. If there's a roid, most animals are not treifas, and therefore, if I have a cup of milk, I can assume it comes from an animal that's not a treifa. Okay? I have no idea whether the cow that gave this milk was a treifa or was not a treifa. If I get that cup of milk, is it a treifa or not? I have no idea. I'm allowed to eat it. Call the parish, Meruba parish. I assume it comes from the roid. Most of the cows are not treifas, I'm allowed to eat. If on the other hand, there's another rule. For Arlah, there's a rule that Arlah is only mutter if it's batal the Messiah. There has to be 200 times as much heter as there is Isser. That means if a farmer has a tree, and he uproots the tree, and he replants it. Now, sometimes when you replant the tree, the 3-year clock starts again. So the farmer uprooted the tree, and went out into his field and stuck the tree back in, and the clock for that tree starts again. Now, he wakes up the next week and he can't remember which tree he replanted. Okay, he's got 150 trees growing in his farm, and one of them is Arlah. One of them, the produce that comes out of that tree is Arlah, but they all look the same. They're all 10-year-old trees, but one of them is halachically a new tree. The other ones are old trees. The din is, the produce of that field is Asr. It has to be batal bil masayim. It has to be 200 times as much heter as Isser. 150 trees of heter is not going to do it. He'd have to have more than 200 trees of heter in order to make his produce mutter. Okay? Now, those are two opinions. One has to be batal bil masayim, that you could imagine, and one is called the parish, Meruba parish, that as long as it's less than 50%. Okay, now, what happens is like this. Almost everybody holds it. We're really not going to get into that complication. Batal bil masayim doesn't apply to produce in the food store. Don't have to worry about that opinion. Don't have to worry about that possibility in the food store. Don't worry that your orange maybe comes from a field where it was not batal bil masayim. What happened was, when people started moving to Eretz Yisroel, how many years ago? 100 years ago? 200 years ago? How long ago people started moving there? Poskim started talking about these questions. They had Safek Arlah questions. The Poskim said, call the parish Meruba parish. As long as you know that less than half of those trees, of that type of tree, are Arlah, you don't have to be concerned. That was the accepted ruling that everybody said. It makes a lot of sense to us. Okay, we understand that. We don't know what it is, whether it's Arlah or it's not Arlah. Call the parish Meruba parish. Okay, came along. There's a sefer. I don't know if you have heard of it. It's called Derech Hamuna. Okay, Derech Hamuna is a sefer written by Chaim Kanievsky. It's a pirush on Zerayim, on the Rambam and all the halachas of Zerayim. He doesn't need my haskama, but it's really an amazing sefer. And in that sefer, he says, nah, 50%, that doesn't do it. That's not going to cut it. Being just less than 50% is not good enough. It needs to be less than 10% of the produce of that kind of tree is not Arlah. Why does he say that? He says that for a very simple reason. We got something called the Mir Hamatzui, okay, which is like this. When I shecht an animal and I want to know if it's a treifa or it's not a treifa, I don't follow the roid. That's not what I'm supposed to do. I have to check it. I have to check the lungs. Okay? Why do I check the lungs and not the legs and not the intestines and not the brains, all the other places where we become a treifa? Why do I only check lungs? So the reason is because that's where treifas are common. More than 10% of animals are treifas in their lungs, so therefore it's a Mir Hamatzui. I have to check to that thing. So Chaim Kanievsky says, so for Arlah also, if let's say 15% of a certain fruit is Arlah, I should be checking for that. What kind of thing is this? Is it just less than 50%? Or is it less than 50%? 50% is There's certain times that applies. But here it's a miyat hamatzi. We do that for animals and we want to check if they're treifus. We do that for vegetables. You want to know which vegetables should we check to see if there are bugs in them. Depends how infested they are. So he says, no, the cutoff shouldn't be 50%, the cutoff should be 10%. Okay? And you have an answer to that question? No. Sounds like a legitimate question. That is a rule that we follow. This 10% miyat hamatzi. Yeah. And it's a miyat hamatzi. The rule is, if 10%, it's a d'rabbanan din, a din d'rabbanan, that we say if more than 10% this only happens, it's common enough, you have to check for that thing. You have to be worried about it. So what happened? Okay. So the answer, indirectly, came from Rabbi Friedman from Skol Yeshiva, and the answer is as follows. Okay. The din is that we have to think about a miyat hamatzi. When the Chachamim said that you have to check for a miyat hamatzi, the Chachamim didn't say, don't eat if you can't check for miyat hamatzi.
If you lose the day,
As the example I gave you about a cup of milk. If I have a cup of milk, I told you could drink milk because most animals are not treifus. Okay? Why do you do that? Wait a second, but more than 10% of animals are treifus, so why let I drink the milk? Why don't I say a miyat hamatzi are treifus, you're not allowed to drink the milk? So what's the reason why you're allowed to drink that milk? The answer is when the Chacham said you should be worried about a 10% possibility. When he said a 10% possibility, what they meant is not that you're not allowed to eat it. It's that you must check before you eat this thing. So if I have a lettuce in front of me, I say, check it before you eat it. Don't assume that most lettuce doesn't have bugs. Some of it does, you have to check for it. You have an animal, you do Shemittah to an animal, so you open up the animal and say, now go check it. But if I have a glass of milk, how am I supposed to know whether the animal that it came from was treif or not? So if I can't find out, I can't find out. If I can find out, I have to. If I can find out, if it's more than a 10% possibility, I have to check out for it. But if I can't find out, then I go with the 50%. Okay? What happened is like this. All the places I mentioned to you who said you go with the 50%, as long as it's less than 50% you can be moderate, they spoke about it whenever they gave their psakim. The Sefer Derech HaMunah came out in the 1990s. Rabbi Friedman explained to me that in about the 1980s is when fruit stores at Eretz Yisroel's hashgacha expanded to include whether the fruit was Arlah or not also. The fruit stores took responsibility to make, the hashgacha took responsibility to make sure that the produce in their store wasn't Arlah. They didn't just take the peaches and be mafresh shumas and maishas. They said, are these peaches from Arlah? And they went climbing back to the farmers to find out who was Arlah or not. So all of a sudden, there's this big change that went on, which was, it used to be, there was no way to know if someone was Arlah. So the din was called the Parsha and Ruba Parsha. If you don't know, as long as less than 50% is mutter, you're allowed to eat it. But all of a sudden there was a change, and all of a sudden you could find out very well whether something was Arlah or not. The hashgacha in the store would poke around, go all the way back to the farmers and find out are these from newer trees or older trees. All of a sudden people were able to find out that information. Well, if you can find it out, then as long as there's a 10% possibility that it is Arlah or something, Isser, you have to do that investigation. And therefore became a change that all of a sudden the din of 50%, which was correct in its time, became now the din that you have to be worried even if it's a 10% possibility of Arlah. All of a sudden the din changed to being 10%. Okay, so it seems like they're disagreeing with each other, but they're really not. Okay, there's one of the tshuvas that talks about it in Minchas Yitzchak, dying rice. That tshuva was written in that sefer was printed in the late 70s. That volume of the sefer was printed in the late 70s. And the tshuva, it's interesting. Okay. It's the advantage of looking at tshuva in the real print rather than on a barilan, because what happened is the tshuva is written and it says, as long as it's less than 50%, you can do it. Okay, in a lot of words. As long as it's less than 50%, you can eat the produce. And then there's like 3 lines at the bottom of the tshuva, written in a different font, that says, but you should really be very careful, and you shouldn't just rely on this thing, and you should really go ahead and only eat it if it's really a very small percentage of produce. It's like, what happened? Did somebody stick in some extra words? What was? It's like, and they didn't even disguise it. I mean, they put it into a different font, and they stuck it on. It's obviously eating it on. Which was the gabbai who stuck that in there? Who owned a fruit business who stuck that in there and said, no, be more careful. Don't listen to the rabbi. And the answer is because when the tshuva was written, and when it's not a dated tshuva. When the tshuva was written, that was the din you felt called the parish. Okay, but when the tshuva was being printed, they were getting ready for print. They said, "Whoa, this doesn't make sense anymore." What I said to you, yesterday is not true today anymore. And they sort of had to adjust history and rewrite the tshuva to say, "Yeah, but be more careful." Okay, so we have these different shittas. I'll mention there's another shitta. Okay. We're not going to talk about the details of it. Rabbi Yashiv has a shita that you have to be worried if it's less than a 5% chance, more than a 5% chance that it's Arlah. Most people do not follow that. I can't say nobody, but that's not most. Most people are following what we say 10%. I will mention that the Bezdin here at the CRC meets with Kashrus once a week. Meets with me once a week to discuss Kashrus topics. As we go through different topics, where actually this question about Suffolk Arlah is what they're working on right now. They've been reading it for the past week or two, and we're meeting, I don't know if it's tomorrow or the next day that they're actually meeting about it, to actually come to a formal position for the CRC as to which level of, which percentage of Arlahs we would care about. Okay, now I'll mention before I get to the next thing, which is going to be some numbers.
You get these numbers are sort of like species standard. 10% of oranges.
Wait 1 second. It's on the next slide. This effort, since I'm in approximately the 80s, as Rabbi Friedman tells me, since the 80s, that there's been attention paid to which fruits are Arlah and hashgacha on it, and even the announcements from Rabbanim that you shouldn't rely on any of this stuff unless it has hashgacha, has made a huge impact on the way farmers actually do their planting in Eretz Yisroel. Okay, the number is, I don't remember the number, I think they told us, okay, in 1999, there were 900,000 Israeli saplings farmers replanted saplings of 900,000 trees under the direction of Rabbanim in order to make sure they wouldn't lose years of Arlah. The plant had been growing for a year, let's say. If you transplant it properly, you don't lose the year. If you transplant it incorrectly, you have to restart the 3-year count. They went to Rabbanim who helped with these things. 900,000 saplings were replanted under the direction of Rabbanim to avoid Arlah. That would help with the early years. That only happens because there's public pressure. The public demanded fruit that wasn't not from Arlah. The farmers translated that into, okay, tell me how do I replant my saplings to not lose years that I want to be able to sell my produce. Okay? So, there's been a lot of change in this way, if you could say it. So now back to our fruits and vegetables that we had on from beforehand, that had the Shemitah produce. Now I'm going to tell you about the Arlah part of these produce. Okay. Now, carrots don't have Arlah. Remember, Arlah is only for things that's trees that grow from year to year, that the tree stays over the winter. So there's no Arlah on carrots. Just as an aside, somebody called me up to tell me, he says to me, did you hear the latest tumult? I said, no, we're like, He says, morning tumult in the afternoon. He says, there was a sign up in my yeshiva, that said you shouldn't eat pineapple because they're Arlah. And I started laughing. He says, what's so funny? I said, well, because you saw a pineapple plant, you plant pineapple every year. Pineapple can't possibly be a problem of Arlah because it's, from our perspective, from this perspective, it's a vegetable. And yeah, it doesn't have Arlah. Vegetables don't have Arlah. Okay, only fruits.
One hour on that.
Yes.
Right. Dole replants pineapples every year, but pineapples in their original form grow on the tree, and you don't have to replant.
That's not my question. Okay, we'll work on that. Okay. So maybe she was not so
I visited Costa Rica.
Yeah.
So these are real pineapples. Hawaii ruined pineapples.
Uh-huh.
Dole ruined pineapples for the whole world, and now they replant them every year.
Got it.
These are real pineapples. In
Okay.
Costa Rica, they grow on a tree.
Okay. So the next board meeting will be in Costa Rica, so we can all learn about the. Okay. So clementines. 0% have Arlah. Okay, I'm not a clementine farmer. Okay, but obviously that's the way the tree grows, is that it doesn't produce fruit for a couple of years. That's how it can be 0% could be Arlah, because I'm not a farmer, but if a clementine tree doesn't give fruit till the 7th year, then you're never going to have Arlah. Okay, so when someone calls up, just pause here for a second. When someone calls up and says, "I bought clementines from Israel, what should I do?" Okay, we go through the following steps. We say, "Is it Arlah? Okay? No, 0%. It's for sure not Arlah. Okay? Is it from Shemitah still? Has the date of beer passed yet? If we're safe on all those grounds, then we talk to them what we're going to do next about Terumos and Maasros. Okay? But sort of in the background, this is what's going on. First one, is it Arlah? It's a fruit. Is it Arlah? Second is it a Shemitah concern? Have we passed beer that we have to get rid of it? And then we get on to the Terumos and Maasros part. That's next. Okay? Grapes. Okay, now, the chart tells us that there's 3 different kinds of grapes. Who would know? Okay? There's purple, green, and red grapes. And each one has its own percentage of Arlah. Now, if you look at the numbers, you see that unless you add a possibility of having needing bittul Messiah, which is very rare, you're safe according to all the shittas over here. Okay, even the most Hamratik shita, which was 5%, you'd be safe. Surely if it was less than that, like the 10% shita. Okay, oranges. Okay, and oranges. There's really a party here with oranges. Okay, how many different types? I did not even list all the oranges. There are more types of oranges. And you see that most of the oranges have tiny percentages of Arlah, okay, except for this one called the Sami orange. I have no idea what that means, what that is. That one's got a relatively high percentage. If you were going with what Rabbi Yasha said, you have to have a 5% cutoff, he would not want to eat those oranges. He would tell you, don't eat those oranges, and the rest of the types you could. Okay? Again, if you go with the 10%, we wouldn't worry here. Okay, and passion fruit had a 40% of them are Arlah. Okay, which obviously it has to do with the way the plant grows. Right? We could surmise that it probably gives fruit from the 2nd year to the 4th year, from the 2nd to the 5th year. There's so much of it, it's Arlah, and then they destroy the trees and they start again. Okay? Well, because such a high percentage of Arlah, so those who hold up, even up to 10% shita wouldn't allow this produce. If you held the 50%, if you were, from the old timers, in those days they could have allowed it, and that's the reason why they didn't write a date for when the Kedusha lasts till. They said, we're not even going to tell you until when passion fruit is available in the market, because so much of it is Arlah, you can't eat it anyhow. Okay? Don't look at our chart to tell you when you're allowed to eat it, because you can't eat it anyhow, because it's Arlah. Okay? That's what, so they said, we're not even telling you today, we won't tell you. Okay, we know the truth, but we won't tell you. Okay? Anyhow. Okay? Then, sours is a couple of percent, and watermelon, of course, is a vegetable. It's replanted each year, and therefore, watermelon does not have concern of Arlah. Okay? Any questions before we move on to Terumos Maasros? Okay? Terumos Maasros it is. Okay, this is our last thing. Terumos Maasros, of course, applies to all fruits and vegetables. It applies even when there's no Shemitah concerns. Terumos Maasros is, so to speak, all the time. Produce very strong. Okay, we're going to talk about how a person does Hafrashos Terumos Maasros. And we start here in our picture here. We've got 100 apples. Okay, you can count them if you're really bored. There's 100 apples. That's right. Okay, there's 100 apples here, okay? The person needs to be mafresh Terumos Maasros. Okay, so what does he have to do? The first thing is, the first thing you have to do is take off what's called Truma G'dola. You have to take any tiny amount. Okay, so you would slice off a tiny bit. If you look at the top left corner, you got the apple there. You slice off a tiny bit. Okay, any tiny bit is Truma. Next is Meiser Rishon. Take off 10% of the produce. You could vote on what color you think those apples are. Brown. I don't know what color you want to say that is. And you take off 10% of the apples, and those are Meiser Rishon. Next is, from those 10 apples that you took off as Meiser Rishon, 1 out of those 10, okay, we call that on the gray one, okay, the gray apple there, 1 out of 10 apples, that's called Terumos Maasros, that goes to a kohen again. Okay, so the Truma and the Terumos Maasros go to a kohen. Next, you need to take another 10% of what's left as a secondary meiser. I'll tell you what a secondary meiser is in a second. Okay, but as a secondary meiser. So we already took off 10 and a little bit for the first separations that we did. So we have a little less than 90 left, so we need to take only 9 apples as our secondary meiser. Okay, now the secondary meiser depends on what year of Shemitah it is. And that's as follows. If you're in the first or the second year of Shemitah, that's this year and next year, the secondary meiser is called Meiser Sheni. Okay, the rule of Meiser Sheni is you need to eat it in Yerushalayim. We'll talk about in a second what you do with it. Nowadays, you're not allowed to eat Meiser Sheni in Yerushalayim nowadays. The third is, in the third year, it's Meiser Ani. So that percentage, those 9 apples go to poor people who can do what they want to with it. 4th and 5th year, again, Meiser Sheni. 6th year is Meiser Ani. And the 7th year is Shemitah. These Meisers don't apply during Shemitah. So depending on the year, what you do with that secondary Meiser. Okay, either we call it Meiser Sheni, literally the second Meiser, or Meiser Ani, that goes to poor people. And then, now that we've done that, on the years that there was Meiser Sheni, that's a CRC, it was a CRC coin, in the years that there's, I'll explain you that is in a second. It disappeared too quickly. But in the years that there's Meiser Sheni, the Meiser Sheni has Kedusha to it. You have to eat it in Yerushalayim. Okay? Nowadays, we're not allowed to eat Meiser Sheni in Yerushalayim. What we do is, you take off the Kedusha from that Meiser Sheni, and you paid it onto a coin. Nowadays, we're allowed to be paid to that Kedusha, even onto a tiny, even a proof of it. You can put all the Kedusha of 9 apples, let's say 9 apples is worth $3, I'm allowed to take all the Kedusha of those 9 apples and put it onto 1 proof worth of a coin. When you put the Kedusha onto the coin, now that coin has Kedusha to it. The coin that passed by really quickly over there is an Israeli coin. That coin has a mem on it. The Mishnah says you're supposed to put a mem on it from Meiser, so you should know that this coin has Kedusha Meiser Sheni on it. And there's a couple of rules for that coin. Okay, that coin has a couple of rules to it. One rule is it has to be suitable as currency in the country that you're in. Okay, so we wouldn't use that Israeli coin to be separate Terumos and Meishos over here. Over here we would use an American coin. Okay, it has to be legal tender where you are. It has to have, in the simple case where the hafrasha, where the kedusha is worth at least 1 pruta, then you can put it onto any coin. How much is a pruta? A pruta is a certain measure of silver. Nowadays it's about a penny and a half. Okay, so if you had a nickel, and the Meiser Sheni was worth at least about a penny and a half, you could put the kedusha onto your own nickel. Pull a nickel out of your pocket. So let's say in this case we have 9 apples, and I told you they're worth $3. So we have $3 worth of kedusha. I could say, I'm transferring the kedusha from these 9 apples onto this nickel. Okay, now all that kedusha is stuck into this nickel now. Okay, that nickel eventually has to be destroyed. If you watch on our website, we have a video of us destroying them. They have to be destroyed before the end of the Pesach of the 4th year or Pesach of the 7th year. So last Pesach we made a video of us destroying the CRC's coin that we had.
Is that legal?
It was an Israeli coin. So whether it's legal to destroy an Israeli coin is not relevant to us.
It has to be lawful.
What do you say? Well, so it's hard to explain, but we were using an Israeli coin, and it was left in Eretz Yisroel. I didn't bring the picture here, but we left it in someone's house there. There we were able to use the coin there. We fetched it back in time before Pesach, and we destroyed it here. We made a little video back. You could watch this. Yes.
Quick question. Do you accept to be in the presence of that coin?
No.
You keep an Eretz Yisroel in other words and...
Yes, you do not need to be near the coin. So our coin we kept over there in someone's house. There was a whole story. You can read about it. We have it on our website.
And if the coin is in the Israeli embassy in the United States?
Is it legal tender over there?
No. My question is, yeah, it's a legal tender.
I have no idea whether it's legal tender in the Israeli embassy. I don't know. That's the question. Is it legal
Israeli embassy here?
Yeah, whether it's legal tender.
You go and you see with the vending machines. What do they take?
Don't they throw something in the Yamamel?
Yes, so if you could watch us throwing into Lake Michigan, if you watch our video, you'll see us doing beer meisters, getting rid of our coin, throwing into Lake Michigan. So, doesn't have to be. You need to watch the video. You'll know all about it. Okay, it's on our website. It's on YouTube. We broke in and we
busy. The guys having fun.
Yes, that day we had a lot of fun. Yes, anyhow. So
Go to the beach.
It was actually quite a job to break the coin. That was not so simple. That was the hard part. Anyhow, so we have to take the kedusha off. Now, if someone were to have so little Meiser Sheni that it was worth less than a pruta, then you have a problem. Okay, there is a solution to that problem, but then you need to call your rabbi. Okay, and if you're the rabbi, you call a different rabbi, and you say, "What do I do now? What do I do now that I have so little kedusha?" It's not a very common thing. It would be like if you were in someone's house and they had like maybe some herbs on their salad that had a tiny bit. The whole herbs itself was worth 5 cents, so 9% of that was worth such a tiny amount. But it's not a common thing. Anybody who's being mafish usually has a pruta worth, even when silver was really high. A pruta was like 3 cents. So it's usually pretty easy. You don't have to worry about that.
Pruta was copper.
A pruta was copper, but it's an amount of silver. It's a certain value of silver. It's a certain amount of grams of silver. Yes. It's the value in silver of that amount of... Okay. So this is what you have. This is what you're trying to do. Okay. Now, when you finish this whole job, what happened? I did all these apples. I took these ones and these ones. The ones that I'm not allowed to eat are the tiny bit that I separated as truma, that was on the top left, the purple one. The tiny bit that I separated as truma, only a kohen whose Torah could eat that. And the trumas meiser, the gray one, whatever we call that one, the gray one that we took out of the long line of other ones, of the browner ones, that one that's trumas meiser is also only for a kohen and only if he's tahar. Those are the ones we can't eat. All the rest of them, the meiser rishon that goes to Levi, everyone's allowed to eat that. Meiser ani, you could eat. It has no kedusha to it. Meiser sheni, we took the kedusha off of it. So the only ones that we can't eat are the one and a little bit. The one whole one that was the Trumas Meiser, and the little bit which is the Truma Gadol. Okay, so we have 98 that we're allowed to eat, 98 plus, and one and a little bit that we're not allowed to eat. Okay?
You can make the kedusha. The ones you gave to a lady have.
So nowadays we don't give it to a lady. Obviously nowadays we do the separation. We don't actually give it to a lady. For us, we don't give it to a lady, and therefore we do the separation. We did the mitzvah of being mafresh the meiser for him, but we can eat it. We don't eat it. We can do the meiser ani. We don't actually give it to an ani. In Eretz Yisroel, on the farm, they actually, if they do it right, would give it to an ani. We don't give it to an ani. And therefore, we don't have to worry about that. The meiser sheni, we were mafresh, and then we took the kedusha off of it. So now it became just regular apples. Okay? So all of a sudden, we're left with 98 plus, and one and a drop we're not allowed to eat. Okay? Now, this is how you would do it if you had 100 apples in front of you. Okay? Most people are not actually sitting and doing this whole thing, and therefore there's a procedure. Okay? The procedure for mafresh trumas and meisers goes like this. First, you take off a little bit more than 1%, and you put it someplace. The little bit more than 1% means the 1% is what's going to be the trumas meiser, and the little bit is what's going to be the truma. So you take that one and a little bit, and you put it on the side. Then you're going to say a special nusach. You'll see that on the next slide. Exactly what you're supposed to say. You're going to say a whole bunch of stuff. Then, that one and a little bit that you separated, they have kedusha to them. You're not allowed to eat them. They're truma tmeya. You're not allowed to eat them. You wrap them in a bag and you put them in the garbage.
You don't have to wait for it to spoil?
We do not wait. The letter of law is you're supposed to wait for it to spoil. The Chazon says nowadays we don't do that. We wrap it up, we put it in the garbage.
Because I heard whenever I go to Eretz Yisroel to visit my daughter, she said that the Bnei Brak is passing and you have to wait. Or maybe the Yerushalayim. The machlokes between the Bnei Brak and the Yerushalayim, they say you have to wait for it to spoil.
So I don't know what they say in Yerushalayim, but I do know the Chazon says that you could throw it out, which is what most people do. So I guess that's the Bnei Brak side of the story. That's what most people do. They wrap it up and they put it in the garbage. Okay, and then you have to do this whole procedure. We just spoke about for every vegetable that you have. You do once for the apples, and then every other vegetable that you have to do the same thing. Okay, one for each. Separately, each one by itself. Okay, so now what's the wording of the hafrosha? Okay, there's going to be a lot of little words here, okay? Okay, you take this 1%, you put it on the side, and you go the following. You say, I designate a certain spot. I say, this little spot that I put over there, the what's more than 1%. On my plate, I have 1% plus. The plus, whatever is more than 1%, that's going to be my truma. Okay? I'm not reading all the words. Okay, then I say, you know that one apple there? The one apple that's not the plus. The one apple that's there, plus the 9 equivalents of that. Okay, that's what I want it to be my meiser. I want that to be my meiser. Then the one that's on the plate, that's the trumas meiser. I separate that with my trumas meiser. Then I have my 9% of the whatever color you think that is red ones that I make them as the meiser sheni or the meiser ani, whichever year it's appropriate. If I have kedusha on there, if it's a meiser sheni year, then I take the kedusha off, and then I'm done. Okay, and I'm done.
Last step, the master sheni with his designated kedusha hereby be redeemed. Any person can make that declaration?
Yes.
If you're just a consumer?
Every person could do that if they have a coin. Now,
I'm saying, can I do it on your coin?
If I let you, you can do it on my coin. Wait, and if my coin is not filled up. So if we did it on a quarter, it has 25 cents worth of kedusha available to it. Let's say that has 15 prutas worth. You could take one pruta, and he could take one pruta. He'll not use it all up. You can't go over. You can if you really want to be fancy. If you have the ball on, you can move the kedusha from that coin onto another coin. You can empty your coin out. Okay, most people don't need to do that. That's for a special procedure why you have to do it. You can use up the coin up to a certain amount until it's done, until it's filled up with kedusha. So in Eretz Yisroel, people who do this regularly in Eretz Yisroel, they don't keep coins. They sign up with a service, and the service says, we'll make sure we have enough coins for you. So you pay for the year, and when you sign us up for a service, you can do whatever you want to. You say, I'm using the coin over there. I have a membership, and I can use the coin over there. Okay. After we talked about it. We did talk about it. But for people, for us, if we have this once in a while, for most people it's probably easier to do it once on a dime that they have in their pocket, and then just make sure they treat it properly, than do what they have to do to get rid of that dime. Yes, Rabbi Emerson.
I did it on my Ventra card the other day. I went over, but they give you a certain window, and then you can just...
You put truma onto your Ventra card?
No. The Ventra card is to get on the air.
Yeah.
But if you go over, they let you go over as long as you
fill it up soon.
Fill it up soon.
Okay.
They have the same thing in Eretz Yisroel. They have what's called like a venture card.
Yeah, well, what they have in their choice, there's, let's see, 500 people who are using this service. Okay, so today I use 5 pruters, and he used 1, and tomorrow...
Track how many they use?
And then they move the Kedusha from those...
But they track it.
Yeah.
You have to swipe your card.
No, you don't swipe your card.
So what do they assume how much was used every
They
day?
have a cheshbon of how much is used every day, then they move all that Kedusha onto a little coin, they throw that coin in. What?
What do you do with your especially designated coin in someone's house in Israel? How do you know if I've used it every day?
When we had that coin there,
Yeah.
because that coin was part of one of these services.
So what else is rare?
They were pulling the Kedusha off of it every day for us. It was
That coin was not running out, in other words.
right, it was a special coin. You could read all that. It's on our website, a whole article about how that coin happened. Okay, that coin is gone. That coin's in Lake Michigan now. You know, the Michigan now.
Time limit for the coin?
You have to get rid of it before Pesach of the 4th year of Shemittah and the 7th year of Shemittah. It's called the mitzvah of beer meisters. Biarti HaKodesh from the Bais. At the end of the Pesach of the 4th year and Pesach of the 7th year, you have to get rid of it. So at that point, we pulled the coin back from Eretz Yisroel and we destroyed it.